Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. Things are heating up in the Texas House Republican runoff elections and in Texas House politics in general. The establishment Republicans are trying to flex to loudly and as clearly as possible endorse their status quo or stay silent on the fact that the Texas House has failed in any issue, while conservatives are mounting a coalition of sorts, and they've rolled out the contract with Texas. There are other things going on, and one of the most important things for those of you who are going to the Republican State Convention is today I'm going to overview some questions you should be asking anyone running for chairman of the Republican Party of Texas. Let's get to the show. On Monday morning, 13 conservative Republicans, a combination of incumbent Republicans and incoming Republican members who were successful in their elections in March, rolled out the contract with Texas. And I'm going to overview what this contract does and commits to and talk about why I believe conservative Republicans are starting to coalesce together and make sure that you can publicly say, I'm going to actually talk about the importance of being able to publicly say things need to get better in the Texas House. Let's first read the contract. To reform the Texas House of Representatives and select a real Republican speaker. Texas voters have repeatedly elected Republicans to serve as governor, lieutenant governor in every statewide office and given Republicans huge majorities in both the Texas House and the Texas Senate. And they have given them. However, for far too long, Republican speakers of the Texas House have centralized power to themselves, which renders individual Texans without effective representation, and colluded with Democrats to advance progressive policies and stop Republican priorities. The House's most recent session was marked by obstruction, dysfunction, and a lack of fundamental fairness in application of the House's rules, and this cannot continue. The message of last month's primaries was self-evident and sent a clear message that business as usual is not acceptable. The future of our state is on the line, and with an out-of-control federal government that seeks to undermine our borders, the Constitution, and our freedoms, Texas must lead by example. As conservative Republican members and prospective members of the Texas House, we are committed to reforming it from a body of liberal dysfunction to a body that more faithfully serves Texas voters, and it is time for new leadership in the Texas House. To keep the promises we've made to Texas voters, we, the undersigned, expect the next Speaker of the House to advance the cause of liberty and adhere, at a minimum, to the following reforms to improve the integrity, transparency, and efficiency of the House. And here are the 12 reforms that are listed. 1, only solicit support for speakership from Republican members. And if y'all listened to last week's episode with Tom Oliverson, if you didn't, you need to go back and listen to it. And if you did, then, you would have heard him discuss the reason that Republicans have to be the ones that pick and not let Democrats in the process. And I've talked about that for a long time. 2, end the practice of awarding Democrats with committee chairmanships. 3, ensure all GOP legislative priorities receive a floor vote before any Democrat bills. Again, this is just setting a right relationship status. They can't imagine a world where Republicans prioritize their own policies. And to some extent, these members are saying we actually believe that GOP legislative priorities should be priorities with us. There's a big move in House leadership to create their own Republican priorities. Like we, the politicians, should get to decide what our priorities are, because they hate when the grassroots pick the priorities and then base the responsiveness of the legislature based on whether or not they even debate or vote on those. 4, Number 4, replace the current liberal parliamentarian with staff committed to only offering advice on adherence to House rules, not to advancing their personal ideology. Again, it's saying this publicly is dangerous. J.M. Lozano has said this. Tom Oliverson said this. But even like members of the Freedom Caucus, they cannot publicly say, we have a liberal parliamentarian who makes bad rulings. They can't say it. Because if they do, they're kind of like calling out the game that's played. And a lot of them will all try to convince themselves that the parliamentarian has to go, but they will never admit that he has a liberal agenda.
They've been called the most powerful political entity in Texas. They are the 800-pound gorilla in every campaign. Texas wouldn't look the same without them, for better or for worse. So I'm traveling the state to find out who they are, why they started, and what they're now doing to Texas.
Number 5, limit the speaker to 2 terms to reduce the power over individual members. Number 6, ensure there are no longer any Democrat majority committees. There should be no committee where you have to get a Democrat vote to get a bill out of that committee. 7, stop parliamentary abuse by requiring only substantial adherence to House rules to keep hyper-technical points of order from killing good legislation. That's more of a rules change that they're saying needs to be implemented that a speaker should support. Number 8, allow audio and video recordings of all House proceedings, including point of order debates. This alone would pretty much screw the speaker. And it would honestly hurt a lot of the members like the Freedom Caucus and stuff who will, behind the scenes, potentially position themselves in ways of being helpful to leadership through points of order discussions, or will make good discussions, will be ignored by the liberal parliamentarian, but then they would never say anything about it, right? It's kind of like you can't talk about the fact that the speaker and the liberal parliamentarian were ganging up and defeating you. And so if those were just streamed, it would basically give Texans a window into the type of games that get played. So that's a really interesting point that they make. Number 9, start substantive work as soon as the session begins and end delays that kill priority legislation. Number 9 is something that, again, Tom Oliverson as a speaker candidate spoke very eloquently on last week. You should go listen to that. Number 10, reform the calendars committee to increase transparency and accountability. They don't give specifics, but they just say we should have a conversation about that, and somebody should commit that it's basically just admitting that it's not transparent or accountable. Number 11, select a Republican as Speaker pro tem. Number 12, decentralize power by prohibiting the distribution of political funds from the speaker. Other members have talked about this, but you have to understand that it's only in recent history that the sitting speaker has been a person that takes the gavel, that raises millions of dollars, and then becomes the central financial political figure in the Texas House to dole out money and basically decide whether you have the support you need for your reelection, in conjunction with Texans for Lawsuit Reform and Associated Republicans of Texas. That is a recent phenomenon. It's not the way the Texas House functioned for a long time. There weren't term limits on speaker, but historically speaking, speakers did not serve for long periods of time. It was not anticipated that they would serve for long periods of time. And as you can imagine, if you thought that the speaker was going to be speaker for a couple sessions, you would have a different relationship with him than if you thought, this guy's young, he could be here for a decade. I need to kind of figure out what that looks like. And you would be more subservient to that speaker instead of the speaker serving the members. There's just an inappropriate relationship in a sense right now with the speakership. The members serve the speaker and they serve the speaker's cardinals. So if you're in the Texas House right now, you serve Dade Phelan, you serve Dustin Burrows, you serve Greg Bonin, you serve Will Metcalf, you serve Morgan Meyer, you serve, go on down the list, Cody Harris to get your local and consent bill out. You serve Todd Hunter on state affairs. These members you serve, they don't serve you. And so there's not an idea that leadership is there to serve alongside with members and figure out how to do what's best for Texas. So these are some general things that these 13 members have laid out. Now, the 13 members that signed on originally were Brian Harrison, J.M. Lozano, Nate Schatzline, Tony Tinderholt, Steve Toth. So 5 sitting members. And then 8 incoming members: Janice Holt, Mitch Little, Shelley Luther, Brent Money, Don McLaughlin, Matt Morgan, Mike Alcott, Wes Verdell. I've talked about a lot of these people, so I think this is really encouraging to see members stepping up early and signing on. The even more encouraging thing to watch was that when this thing got released Monday, on Monday alone, 10 more members signed on to the letter. And these are members that are running in these runoff elections. So Cheryl Bean signed on. She's running in the open Craig Goldman seat. Ben Bias signed on. He's running in the open Kyle Casal seat. David Covey signed on. He's running in, of course, David. He's running against Dade Phelan. Andy Hopper signed on against Lynn Stuckey. Helen Kerwin against Dwayne Burns. AJ Louderback, who's running in the open seat in Victoria that's held by Jeannie Morrison. David Lowe signed on against Stephanie Click. I'm going through the list, but they mixed up. By the way, I think I said Mike Alcott originally on the original list. Katrina Pearson, who's running against Justin Holland. Carissa Richardson, who is running against Frederick Frazier. Alan Schoolcraft, who's running against John Kemple. So again, assuming that a decent amount of these people who have signed on win their runoffs, and a lot of these people are very well positioned in their runoffs, you have over 25% of the Republican caucus having already said we need to do these things, right? I can tell you, as somebody who's had many conversations with many members across the Republican caucus, there are a lot of members who support these ideas but don't want to say it. And that's actually what I want to transition to. Why don't people want to say the Texas House should be better? An important thing to just remember is that I believe there are only 6 Republicans in the caucus who have publicly criticized Dade Phelan. 6. There are 80 plus members of the legislature. Those 6 are Steve Toth, Brian Harrison, Tony Tinderholt, Nate Schatzline, J.M. Lozano, and Tom Oliverson. Okay. Now, it's not to say that there aren't other members who have said things that criticize the impeachment process, criticize, the way the Texas House is. But outside of those 6, I don't know members who have come out and said Dade Phelan has led the House very poorly. We have to have a new speaker. Basically, those 6 have opposed Dade Phelan. Okay. No other sitting Republican members opposing Dade Phelan. Now, you might ask yourself, why? Well, literally 30 minutes before I started recording this show, the Texas GOP caucus PAC, the Texas Republican caucus PAC, announced endorsements of all the incumbents up for re-election. So Dwayne Burns, Frederick Frazier, Justin Holland, Stephanie Click, John Kemple, Dade Phelan, Lynn Stuckey, Gary Van Dever, all endorsed for re-election. It says they proudly endorsed them. Okay. And if you think about it, you have to kind of ask yourself, like, these people who live sexual lifestyles that align themselves with the letters LGBT, right? The group, the L's, the G's, the B's, and the T's tell one another, we have to be proud about it, right? We have to scream it from the rooftops. We have to have parades. We have to do all this stuff that draws attention and says, this is good. Okay. So they know that the choices they've made in their life are not good, true, beautiful, rightly ordered. But they are going to scream from the rooftops and have the word associated with their entire life decisions as pride, right? So why is it important that Republicans in the Texas House are proud to try to get indicted Frederick Frazier, who was indicted as a felon, pled down to a misdemeanor and was dishonorably discharged from the Dallas Police Department. The entire Republican caucus pack is proudly endorsing him for re-election. Really? Greg Abbott won't even go into this guy's district for his re-election campaign. But the whole House caucus pack is proud of him. And you go, why? Why are they equally proud of Frederick Frazier as they are of any other member? Because you're part of the tribe. The most important thing they have to catechize all these new incoming members in is an idea that this is a rule you'll hear, publicly praise, privately criticize. So they tell members this all the time. Hey, one really important thing, guys, as you're coming in is one of our kind of rules here is we publicly praise and we privately criticize. Now, by the way, that rule only applies to people who abide by their rules. There's an exception. If you're a conservative Republican who fights for conservative policies, even when House leadership kills them, and then you call House leadership out, you can now be criticized as much as they want. There's no privately criticize, publicly praise rule for you. So if you're Brian Harrison, if you're Steve Toth, if you're Tony Tinderholt, if you're Nate Schatzline, they are 100% going to encourage and reward people who publicly criticize, right? Those people. But everybody else is off limits. And this rule that they try to establish sets up a structure that allows for this toxic environment to fester, where it's like, I'm not allowed to say things are not good. I'm not allowed to make public observations on things that everybody knows to be true. I only say that to say, if you're wondering why only a handful of incumbent Republicans have signed on to this, you just have to understand that anybody currently there is part of this really broken culture. So my encouragement, though, when I say that, and by the way, I don't know if I have like a sinus infection going on or anything else. So if my voice squeaks a little bit, just understand I'm like basically not breathing right now with all the allergies that are coming on and the stuff that's getting blown up and everything else. My encouragement to you is not to basically discount every sitting Republican member of the Texas House. That's not it. But you have to understand that they are in a very bad culture and environment. And so it is going to take some time for many of those Republicans to decide that it's okay to say what everybody knows, because that's not how they've been surrounded. And the people still in charge are working very, very hard to keep the rules followed. See, the worst thing for a Dustin Burrows or a Greg Bonin or a Cody Harris or a Brad Buckley or any of these people who want to be the next speaker or make sure that the status quo stays as much as possible, a Will Metcalf, a Charlie Guerin. The most important thing is that the rules stay in place, because if the rules get broken, then they might not apply to the next round of leadership. So if you're allowed to publicly criticize obvious faults of Republican leadership, if you do that and get away with it, then that might set a bad precedent for the next speaker. They want to maintain control of this legislative body. So that's why they're fighting really hard to continue to ensure that sitting Republican members feel worried enough to not say anything. I'm really encouraged by the contract with Texas. I think it's a helpful step in the right direction to say, all of us who just got elected, we're okay saying things that seem obvious. So I hope that over time makes it easier for a lot of these sitting Republicans to say those same things. I want to close by giving you some questions you should be asking anybody running for RPT chair. Mike Garcia, who's the former executive director of the Freedom Caucus, announced, I think late last week, that he's running for RPT chair. And he said something in his announcement that I think is, should concern everyone. He said, I want to get the Republican Party of Texas back to the basics. Okay. Back to the basics. And this has been a term used for a long time by the establishment wing of the GOP to criticize conservatives who use the party to advance conservative policy when Republicans are standing in the way. Understand how I caveated that. Because if Republicans weren't standing in the way of conservative policy, then I don't think people like Mike Garcia and others would say we shouldn't advance conservative policy. It's how do you advance conservative policy when Republicans are the ones standing in the way? See, back to the basics. He then listed those things, like what this means. And this is not meant as some massive dump on Mike Garcia. I've known Mike for a while. I don't have a bad opinion of him or the work that he's done in Texas. But this kind of framing and messaging is really important and should concern you. It's very similar to the messaging of Dr. Dana Myers. It's almost identical. This whole, we want to take the RPT back to the basics of raising money and helping elect Republicans and doing these things. Basically, when Mike Garcia went down his list and said, this is what I want to restore the Republican Party to, it was almost word for word what Jared Patterson has been saying he wants the RPT to do, right? They just need to raise money and they need to give us the money. So Jared Patterson always complains and basically says, Dade Phelan had to give us money because Matt Rinaldi wouldn't raise enough to give us. So we'd have to raise all the money and give it to ourselves. What really happens is if the party is aggressively conservative and working to advance the grassroots interests, even when Republicans are standing in the way, then the establishment moderate donors across the state don't give money to the party. Okay. They literally try to bankrupt the party and they haven't succeeded. And it's frustrating to them. So now we're coming into convention. And literally, for almost the entire tenure of Matt Rinaldi's chairmanship, they've tried to bankrupt the party, and it hasn't worked. Because conservatives, grassroots Texans, individual donors have all stepped up to make sure that the RPT is going to stay a strong institution. But what Jared Patterson says is what Matt Rinaldi should be doing instead of criticizing Dade Phelan is he should raise money and give it to us when we run. So when Mike Garcia says things like, I want to get back to the basics of raising money and helping candidates and doing things, he's kind of like, it's like a wink, wink, nod, nod. And a lot of these people were like, that's what we want the RPT to do. Stay out of our business. So this got me thinking, and as the conversation continues over the next, 6 weeks that we prepare for convention, I want you thinking about questions to ask candidates for RPT chair. The first question I would ask them is, this is something very well known publicly, but Chairman Matt Rinaldi was vocally critical of Dade Phelan killing a lot of Republican policy during the session in Dade's own district. And what we know from looking at polling now is that the work that Matt Rinaldi and others did significantly increase Dade's negatives and decrease his positives based on the fact that he held up all this Republican policy. So imagine that when the Republican Party of Texas is actively being willing to criticize the sitting Republican speaker for killing a bunch of Republican policy, it actually creates an environment where somebody like David Covey can get elected. So the way I'd ask the question is, Chairman Matt Rinaldi actively criticized Dade Phelan for killing a lot of Republican priorities last session during the session in Dade's own district. Do you support that kind of activity? And as chair, would you be willing to call out a liberal Republican speaker if they're killing Republican priorities? Now, understand that a lot of them will say things like, we need a chairman who will push Republican priorities. And what they mean often is they want to be a chairman who says we need Republican priorities, but if a Republican speaker kills those priorities, they never say anything about it. Okay? That's the key. It's not like you can never talk about the fact that there are Republican priorities. It's that when we kill them, you can't tell anybody we killed them. Kind of think of it like the rule in the Texas House, right? If you're a state member, just don't say it. Just don't say it. So I would ask them that question. That's the first question. Second, and then this is kind of like leads into that. Will you continue to the posture of the RPT serving the grassroots first and only praising Republican incumbents who align themselves with the grassroots, with the actual meat on the bones of the party? Do you support the Republican Party of Texas's decision to censure liberal Republicans last year? Okay. There were 2 liberal Republicans that got censured, Tony Gonzalez and Dade Phelan. I think you should ask, do you support the decision to censure liberal Republicans in general? It's not just one Republican, because if you just ask about Dade, I think all of them will tell you yes on Dade because they can't not say it. But you're actually asking, I want to know if you as RPT chair believe that liberal Republicans should be censured when they are liberal. What is your position on log cabin Republicans? This has continually been a push to basically water down the Republican Party of Texas's position on the transgender issue, on having sexual ethics. And it has been a push nationally, and it has been a push in our state. I think you should ask every candidate, what is your position on the log cabin Republicans? Here's another way to get specific on how they're going to engage in the legislative session. If Dan Patrick pushes a policy that is in the RPT platform and the next GOP speaker opposes that issue, will the RPT make it clear that they stand with the Senate and not with House leadership? And again, I'm hoping that we're in a place where this isn't happening. But what RPT chairs, many have done in the past, is that if Dan Patrick said, I want to push this conservative policy that's in the Republican platform, and the speaker opposed it, then the chairman, in order to keep everybody happy, would just go out and say, I'm grateful that Dan Patrick has pushed this policy. Period. And so then the grassroots, they're like, great, why didn't it become law? And the Republican Party of Texas's response is like, we will work next time to ensure that this becomes law. They're not okay. They haven't been okay in the past just saying, well, it died in the Texas House and the Calendars Committee. It died in State Affairs. The speaker didn't support it, right? We asked the speaker to support it. He refused to. And this gets into a question I would ask every candidate. Where would you soften the position of the party in order to attract more establishment donors? Quietly, they're all talking about this whole message of like back to the basics and stuff. It's all messaging to say, hey, establishment money, you can come give your money to the party. We're going to soften. So I'd ask them specifically, what areas would you soften to get establishment donors? Okay. And you can reverse the question. If establishment donors say, if you continue in the path that the RPT has set, we will continue to not give money. Are you okay not trying to change the RPT in order to accommodate the Nikki Haley donor class? Okay. So those are some of the questions. I'll come up with other questions as time goes on, but I would start asking these specific questions to anybody running for chairman of the Republican Party of Texas. I look forward to seeing all of y'all in San Antonio. I will be there for the convention, and so participating in everything. And so if you see me, please stop. I met so many of the listeners and viewers at the last Republican State Convention, and I look forward. And there were relationships that I established at the last convention that have actually become really close relationships over the last, almost year now. So I look forward to, I guess it'd be like almost the last year and a half now, almost 2 years. So I look forward to meeting a lot of y'all at convention. If you are coming, feel free to email me through the website, lukemacias.com, or back on my email just to tell me what Senate district you live in, what congressional district you live in, and we can talk about Republican Party of Texas politics along the way. I hope y'all have a great week. There's a lot going on. And it's going to be interesting to see how these runoffs start shaking out because more and more activity is going to happen. If you live in a district that has a competitive runoff, you've probably realized like not a lot's happening right now, but a lot more is about to start happening in each and every one of those districts. You just know this is when the Austin Swamp's about to start dumping, millions of dollars to try to save these people. Anyways, may God bless you and may God bless the great state of Texas.
Do you want to get your news from people who share your values? Texas Scorecard. Real news for real Texans.